So, Robin, it's once again, it's good to see you and to continue our conversations relative to history.
Greetings to you, sir.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I think history is so important because just growing up, studying history gave me some concept of identity in terms of who I was. I mean, it's all well and good to run out there and you play with your buddies or what have you. But the only way you can position yourself, I would say, within society, within the bigger sphere, especially as you grow older and you get out of your teens, is that you have to know some history. You have to know how you got there and who you are. And I think John Henry Clark and my dad say, that also that history is the lens through which you look at the world, and certainly it helps you to shape your future. And I think that's so important for us as African people, because our history, we can't say this enough, our history has been distorted. Number one, it has been shortened, as if to say it began with slavery. And number two, it's been marginalized, as if to say there was no history before Greece. And of course, I think we may have mentioned the last time that certainly Kemet has a prehistory of about 36,000 years, for goodness sake. So we have a history going back 40,000 years before Greece. So we're not newcomers. But I think, unfortunately, we don't know that. And we believe we're newcomers. And we believe that somehow, Europeans have contributed everything in the world. And the only history that there is European history. And somehow this is a history of triumphalism over time and over everybody else, which again is a great mistake. Can you anchor us? A lot of us, certainly in the Western world, come out of the West Africa, Congo area, Congo, Angola, the Slave Coast, the Gold Coast. Can you anchor us in some of the history of that area, the Sudanic empires, Ghana, Mali, Songhai? I mean, we know bits and pieces. Maybe you can pick up with Ghana, which would go back. I mean, it goes back actually intra-Africa with Egypt, and a lot of people don't want to recognize that obviously the Kemetic people traveled outside of Kemet, as well as Africans in the interior traveled into Kemet and so on. Can you chart that landscape for us?
There was 2 books by African historians from Timbuktu. There's a book called The Tariq el-Sudan, which was written by a Timbuktu professor called Abdurrahman el-Sadi. Fortunately, that book is now in English. And what he did was map out the history of Songhai, and he had something to say about Mali, something to say about Ghana. And there's another Timbuktu professor called Mahmoud Kati, and he also mapped out the history of Songhai and had a little bit to say about Mali, a little bit to say about Ghana. So the way we teach it today, where Ghana comes first, Mali comes second, Songhai comes third, we're basing it on the way the Timbuktu professors taught that history. So we are in an African historical tradition. The other thing too is the reason why those Timbuktu professors wrote their history is for the same reason we're doing it now. One of them, Abdurrahman el-Sadi, says, I saw that the history, its gold and small change was disappearing. And I saw the need to document the history of Timbuktu, the princes and saints that were there, the history of the Songhai people, and so on and so forth. So he knew that our history was disappearing, and his thing was to put that history together. Okay, so what do we know about ancient Ghana? Well, there's a source from 951 AD, and that source is a scholar called Ibn Hawqal. Now, why is Ibn Hawqal important? Well, he visited a fringe city in ancient Ghana. The fringe city was called Aldegast, and he witnessed a merchant writing a second merchant a check. Just let that sink in. right?
Absolutely.
951 AD,
Mhm.
he witnessed a merchant writing a second merchant a check.
Mhm.
Now, automatically now, your respect for ancient Ghana is now shot up, right?
Absolutely.
Right. The same scholar, Ibn Hawkal, estimated that the ruler of Ghana was the richest king on the face of the earth by
Wow.
reason of the amount of gold that had been established by him and by his predecessors. So the idea that the rulers of Ghana were the richest people on earth, that was pretty much established by 951 AD. And then when we get to the Mali period, the same level of wealth and opulence, so much so that we could say that between the 10th century and the 14th century, the richest part of the world was the West African desert belt. Fabulously rich in gold. So I mentioned the two chronicles, Tariq al-Sudan, Tariq al-Fatash. Mahmud Qati's Tariq al-Fatash says that it was the night ritual of the Emperor of Ghana that he would only come out after 1,000 logs had been gathered together outside of his palace. They'd be set fire to, so he'd end up with this huge flame, as he put it, that would reach from earth to heaven. And then the prince would come out and establish himself on his platform of red gold. That was the night ritual of how the Kayamagas, as they were called, that's how they were going on in ancient Ghana. We've got a description of the capital city, Kumbisale. The description is that it was made up of 2 townships surrounded by, the documents say, 6 miles worth of suburbs. The archaeology says 10 miles worth of suburbs. And in the suburbs were houses made of stone with roofs and ceilings of acacia wood. And in one part of the town where the Muslims were, they excavated 1 square mile and found evidence that 30,000 people would have lived there. And then, as far as I know, those excavations took place in 1950 and 1951 with a guy called Tomasi. They stopped excavating because 1 square mile produced 30,000 people. They didn't give a figure for the 6 to 10 miles of suburbs. They didn't give a figure, and they didn't give a figure for the traditionalist part of the town where the traditional religion. Why? Because once they found 30,000 in 1 square mile, they decided, we ain't excavating anymore. So essentially, you have evidence of one of the largest cities in the medieval world. Mm-hmm. And you now put this together with what we know about the gold-based wealth. Mm-hmm. And then we know from other documents, the salt-based wealth, them having checks. This is how the people of ancient Ghana were going on back in the day.
Greetings, my name is Robin Walker. I'm also known as the Black History Man. I am perhaps best known for my 2006 book, When We Ruled. Based on this book, I'm launching a new online history course aimed at you, the adults. You could be a parent, you could be a teacher, a mechanic, cleaner, professionals, care workers, security guards, taxi drivers, kitchen workers, entrepreneurs, tech heads, lawyers, all of you. We want people from all over the world to be empowered by our content. We want you to gain mastery over your history and heritage. And you can do this by subscribing to our course. Click on the link to get this powerful, life-changing material.
This is absolutely amazing, and I know one of those stories about the gold. This was with, I think, Mansa Musa, and I think he was one of the kings of Mali.
That's right. That's right.
He traveled down. He was going to Mecca, and he traveled through Egypt, and he had so much gold in his entourage that he destabilized the currency of the world. The gold market went crazy with inflation because of what he did, and he was paying everybody with gold as he went along, and he had the servants carrying all this tremendous amount of gold. Amazing.
And,
You mentioned
yeah, and the new research on Mansa Musa, there was research that was done in 2012, and it made certainly the English newspapers, the American newspapers, and it even made Indian news. And what they did was some scholars, historians, academics, and so on, tried to estimate who were the richest 26 people in history. Yeah. And what they did was they had certain figures like Bill Gates. They had certain people like, you know, the wealthiest, Carlos Slim.
Yeah.
Yeah. They had Ali Khan, one of the rulers of Hyderabad. But the person that came
back in the day, they used to weigh Ali Khan every year and against the amount of gold or something like that. I'm not sure what they did. But his weight in gold was very important.
And here's the thing, that 2012 survey, the person that came in at #1 was Mansa Musa. And they estimated his wealth at the time, 2012, they estimated his wealth at $400 billion US. That today would be 528 billion, by the way. And they estimated it in pounds at the time as 249 billion pounds. So he came in at #1, and then the Rothschild dynasty came in at #2, and then you've got your other 26 people. And so,
and of course, as you know, too, that whole coast has been called the Gold Coast over time. And you went from, you know, from Ghana, Mali, Songhai, and then there was this invasion now from Morocco, which ended these West African empires.
Yeah.
And salt was a part of that, as well as gold was a part of that. Yeah. And that's when now West Africa started to lose its importance in terms of kingdoms and its influence in the world, and not just in African history. Can you tell us about that? Who are these?
Certainly. Yeah, here's the thing. The idea that when the Moroccans invaded Songhai, that was the end of West Africa. No, that was the end of the West African desert belt. There were other civilizations too, but because we spend too much time, in my opinion, bigging up ancient Egypt to the extent of everything else. Because my thing is, yeah, let's big up ancient Egypt. Let's big up Kemet. But that's not the only thing that we ever had that was representing. Okay. All right. So what do we know about the other civilizations? In the Nigeria region, there's the history of Nok, the history of Igbo, the history of the Yoruba kingdoms, the history of Benin, the history of the Hausa city-states, the history of the Kanem-Bornu Empire. I've just found out that the capital of Kanem-Bornu is in Nigeria. The ruins of it, Ngazagamu, is in Nigeria. Now, if we wanted to take each one of those civilizations, there are so many things that are impressive that we could talk about. Do you see? So in other words, most people know that in Ghana, Mali, Songhai, you had the city of Timbuktu, flourished throughout all of that. And so consequently, Timbuktu is a university city with university manuscripts. Did we know that in Hausaland, there was a city called Katsina, and that too was a university city? Did we know that Ngazagamu, which is the capital of Kanem-Bornu, that too was a university city? And they would encourage scholars from different parts of Africa come and study here. And so lots of, for example, lots of those cities were multi-ethnic in terms of who lived there. So it wouldn't just be local people. There would be North Africans, there would be people from other parts of West Africa, there'd be people from the Sudanic belt generally. So you would then, and there's speculation that there could even have been scholars from Congo, but we can't prove that yet.
As a thank you for visiting our website, we are giving you a free copy of our exclusive 100 Black History Facts, which is in fact a taster of our course content. Make sure you leave your email address and we will send it right to you. We hope it inspires you to dig deeper into your history and heritage.
And so consequently, Timbuktu's got manuscripts, but so has Katsina, so has Ngazagamu. And so when it comes to then reconstructing West Africa's history, there's so many areas where we could go to explore their architecture, to explore their literature. Now, they didn't all have a surviving literature, but some of them did. And the ones that did, there's a lot that we can run with. And what it does is this idea that Kemet and Kush are the only places in Africa where you can go and visit and see evidence untrue. Untrue. There was a book by African-American professor, Chancellor James Williams, Destruction of Black Civilization. Brilliant book, love that book. That book changed my life, but it spread one major falsehood, which is still with us. And the falsehood is outside of Kemet, outside of Kush, it's all been destroyed. This is what he should have said. They attempted to destroy. See the difference?
Oh, that's right. He calls it the destruction of Black civilization.
Yeah. What he should have said was they attempted to destroy. There's monuments galore that no one's talking about. There's manuscripts galore that no one's talking about. There's fine art galore, jewelry, coins, all kinds of things that people should have been talking about, but we're not talking about it because we didn't know that that heritage is to be found, because we thought it was all destroyed.
Your point is very well taken, and of course we're going to go that route because we're here to improve the educational level of our people. And I also want to get back to Mansa Musa and ask you, and maybe we can end on this one. Is there a story of I think it was in Mansa Musa's reign, where, I don't know, 25 boats were outfitted and with sailors, with produce and everything, and they were saying, go west to the ends of the ocean and tell me what's there, you know, or don't come back. Go find out what's there, or don't come back. And I think maybe one boat came back or something like that. What do you know about the historicity of that? And does that relate to the Olmecs?
No, it doesn't, but it does relate to something important.
Okay.
It does relate to something important.
Because it was before Columbus, obviously, right?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, this is what we know. 2 African skeletons were discovered in Danish Virgin Islands, are dated to around 1250. And those African skeletons, this is obviously 250 years before Columbus. So definitely bones of Black people from Africa ended up in the Americas. And yes, that predates Columbus. Now, the theory, it wasn't Mansa Musa, it was his predecessor. And who was his predecessor? Well, Englishman Basil Davidson, he theorizes that the Malians pulled off these voyages, and he thinks it was Mansa Muhammad, a predecessor of Mansa Musa. More scholars, following the lead of Professor Ivan van Sertima, think it was Mansa Abu Bakari II. Abu Bakr would be his name in Arabic, and then when you Africanize it, it becomes Abu Bakari. The griots in Mali, they say it's Abu Bakari II, right? And so it would be Mansa Abu Bakari II, and there are definitely 14th century pieces of art made by the Native Americans that clearly show Africans in the art. There's a book by a German scholar, Count Alexander von Wuthenau, called Art of the World. pre-Columbian terracottas. I've got the book, and he's got some of these 14th century pieces in there, and they are clearly, unmistakably Africans. Now, the Olmecs, that's a different story of Black people. That's a different story, because the Olmecs now, you're talking about BC, and that requires its own discussion.
Okay.
But the Malians, yeah, 13. So some scholars think the Malians got there, some say 1311, some say 1307, some say 1250, because the bones that were found in Danish Virgin Islands was 1250.
Yeah, that's interesting to know, because we do feel that those communication may have gone back as far as Kemet with the so-called New World in terms of the Americas. And I think
and if that's
some
true,
evidence that Chinese boats may have also gotten to the Americas.
yeah, and if that's true, that
Yeah.
would be the Olmecs. Do you see?
That would be the Olmecs.
That would be the Olmecs. But that would be, there's a lot to prove there. That's a complicated story. But the Malian one is fairly straightforward. Do you see? Yeah. But yeah, and let me give you one more thing as well.
Sure.
There was a scholar called David Kelly, and he excavated the pavement in the Yoruba city of Ile-Ife. Yes, Ile-Ife had pavements, get over it. Okay, now they excavated the pavements, and they found that the pavements were made of corn cobs. You know, ziames, corn cobs? Yeah, and those corn cobs could only have come from the Americas. Consequently, the date of the pavements in Ile-Ife are thought to be 1000 AD. Okay, yeah, so the pavements are 1000 AD, and they're made of American plants, and that means the Yorubas were talking to the ancient Americans. You see, so the evidence that you're talking about, we now have some of it, and the pavements of Ile-Ife become some of that evidence.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because you also know too, I think that Columbus got a lot of his maps from West African navigators. I think there's a whole series of maps, the Piri maps or something like that, and Henry the Navigator was some person in that period of time who taught Columbus or whatever, and I think there were Africans who went with Columbus. Is that correct?
Facts.
Interesting. Okay, so I think we have a lot to look forward to in terms of excavating our history, because again, it's so rich, and it's the richest history in the world. As a matter of fact, our history is world history. People don't recognize that, and you know, everybody else is subsidiary because we were there first, and everything really evolves or revolves around what we did ultimately in terms of going around the planet, etc., and bringing civilization, iron ore, iron smelting, and everything else. And of course, we'll get into all of that. But I'm impressed by the details of your knowledge. I'm not only impressed, I'm educated by it. So I definitely look forward to our next discussion. So thank you, Robin.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right.